Admiral Kexithara stood before the great crystal dome of the Zenthari High Council chamber, watching the twin suns set over their capital world. 50 years had passed since the last human ship fell silent in the void of space. 50 years since their great victory over the species that had dared to challenge the Zenthari Empire. Yet as he looked out at the gleaming spires of their perfect city, something felt wrong. The council members filed into their seats, their blue-scaled faces showing the same calm expressions they always wore. Ambassador Velnara took her place at the speaking podium, her claws clicking against the smooth surface as she arranged her data tablets. Today marked the anniversary of humanity's final defeat, and tradition demanded they celebrate their triumph. Fellow Zenthari, Velnara began, her voice echoing through the chamber. We gather once again to remember our great victory over the human plague that once threatened our peaceful galaxy. The assembled council members nodded in unison, but their movements seemed mechanical, lacking the fire that once burned in their hearts during the war years. Kexithara noticed the empty seats scattered throughout the chamber. Once every position had been filled with eager young Zenthari ready to serve their empire. Now fewer and fewer citizens seemed interested in public service. The birth rates had been dropping for decades, and their youth appeared listless, going through daily routines without purpose or passion. Commander Zeftal, a scarred veteran of the human wars, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He remembered the final battle above the human homeworld they called Earth. The blue planet had been beautiful, covered in white clouds and vast oceans. The humans had fought desperately in those last days. Not with superior weapons or brilliant tactics, but with something the Zenthari military analysts had classified as irrational behavior. The humans showed us their weakness in the end, Velnara continued, reading from her prepared speech. They refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. They wasted resources protecting civilians instead of focusing on military targets. Their emotional attachments made them predictable and easy to defeat. But Zeftal remembered something different. He remembered human soldiers singing as their ships burned around them. He remembered intercepted communications where humans spoke to their families, telling them they loved them even as enemy fire tore through their hulls. He remembered how human pilots would ram their damaged fighters into Zenthari battleships to save other human vessels, sacrificing themselves for people they had never met. Dr. Moridan raised one of her forearms to request speaking time. As the Empire's leading expert on alien biology, she had spent decades studying the remains of human civilization. Her research had uncovered disturbing patterns that the military leaders preferred not to discuss in public forums. Ambassador Velnara speaks of weakness, Dr. Moridan said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. But my studies suggest we may have misunderstood what we observed during the war. The humans possess traits that we dismissed as flaws. Yet these same traits allowed them to achieve things our species has never accomplished. Kexithara leaned forward, interested despite himself. Dr. Moridan rarely spoke at council meetings, preferring to work alone in her laboratories. When she did address the council, her words usually challenged conventional thinking in ways that made the leadership uncomfortable. Explain, Velnara said, though her tone suggested she would rather move on to the traditional victory celebrations. The humans created art that moved other species to tears, Dr. Moridan continued. They wrote music that inspired beings across the galaxy to feel emotions they had never experienced before. They built monuments not to military victories but to abstract concepts like hope and freedom. These are not the actions of a weak species. Zeftal nodded slowly. During the occupation of human colonies, Zenthari soldiers had discovered libraries filled with millions of books, art galleries displaying works that seemed to capture light itself, and concert halls where humans had gathered to share experiences that went beyond mere entertainment. The Zenthari had cataloged these items as curiosities, unable to understand their true significance. The humans also displayed unprecedented cooperation between different genetic groups, Dr. Moridan added. They formed bonds with individuals who shared no blood relation, treating strangers as family members. They risked their lives for abstract principles rather than genetic survival. Our behavioral models could not predict their actions because they operated on principles we do not possess. Ambassador Velnara's scaled skin darkened with irritation. These observations change nothing about our victory. The humans are extinct, and our empire controls their former territories. We achieved our goal of galactic dominance, did we? Dr. Moreeden asked quietly. Our birth rates have declined by 60% since the war ended. Our artistic output has become repetitive and sterile. Our young citizens report feeling empty and purposeless. Our technological advancement has slowed to near zero. We won the war, but something is dying inside our civilization. The chamber fell silent. Kexathera looked around at his fellow council members and saw the truth reflected in their eyes. They had noticed the changes too, but none had dared to voice their concerns. The Xanthari Empire was more powerful than ever before, controlling vast regions of space and countless resources. Yet their society felt hollow, like a beautiful shell with nothing living inside. Zeftal remembered the last human he had encountered during the final assault on Earth, a young female named Amy Clark, who had been working as a teacher in one of their education centers. She had been found protecting a group of human children, reading them stories as Xanthari forces surrounded the building. When captured, she had not begged for her life or offered information about human defenses. Instead, she had asked if the Xanthari soldiers had families of their own, if they understood what it meant to love something more than themselves. The question had puzzled Zeftal at the time. Love was not a concept that translated well into Xanthari thinking. They understood genetic loyalty and pack survival instincts, but the human emotion called love seemed to extend far beyond biological programming. Humans loved ideas, loved strangers, loved things that existed only in their imagination. It had seemed like a mental disorder. Now, 50 years later, Zeftal wondered if the humans had possessed something his species lacked. The emptiness that had grown inside Xanthari society felt like the absence of something important, something they had destroyed without understanding its value. Dr. Moreeden gathered her data tablets and prepared to leave the speaking podium. I request permission to present my full research findings to the Council at our next meeting. I believe we need to understand what the humans represented if we hope to address the problems facing our civilization. Kexathera watched the sun disappear behind the crystal spires of their perfect city. Victory had tasted sweet 50 years ago, but the aftertaste had grown increasingly bitter with each passing year. Perhaps it was time to learn what they had really won, and what they might have lost forever. Dr. Moreeden's laboratory stretched across 3 levels beneath the Xanthari capital, filled with preserved human artifacts and biological samples that had been collected during the war. The sterile white walls held thousands of items that once belonged to the extinct species: clothing, tools, artwork, and personal belongings that told the story of a civilization the Xanthari had never truly understood. Fleet Admiral Gixhara followed Dr. Moreeden through the winding corridors, his heavy footsteps echoing off the polished floors. As one of the primary military commanders during the human conflicts, he had agreed to help review the research findings before they were presented to the High Council. What he saw in the laboratory challenged everything he thought he knew about their former enemies. This section contains items recovered from human homes, Dr. Moreeden explained, stopping before a display case filled with small objects. Notice how they kept pictures of other humans on their walls, not for identification purposes but for emotional comfort. They surrounded themselves with reminders of individuals they cared about, even when those individuals were far away or had died years earlier. Gixhara examined the photographs showing human families gathered together, their faces displaying expressions of joy and affection. The Xanthari took pictures only for official records or military intelligence. The idea of keeping images purely for emotional reasons seemed wasteful and illogical. They also created objects with no practical function, Dr. Moreeden continued, pointing to a collection of small sculptures and decorative items. These serve no purpose except to please the eye or remind the owner of pleasant experiences. The humans invested time and resources in things that existed solely to make life more beautiful. The Admiral remembered interrogating human prisoners during the war, trying to understand their battle strategies and weaknesses. One prisoner, a pilot named Jake Morrison, had carried a small metal object in his pocket that served no apparent function. When questioned about it, Morrison had explained that his daughter had made it for him in school, shaping the metal into a crude star. He carried it during combat missions because it reminded him of her smile and gave him strength during difficult moments. Gixhara had classified this behavior as a psychological weakness that could be exploited in future battles. Human soldiers were distracted by thoughts of home and family, making them less focused on their duties. The Xanthari military had used this information to develop propaganda designed to make humans worry about their loved ones, hoping to break their fighting spirit. The humans had a concept they called hope, Dr. Morridon said, leading him to another section of the laboratory. Our translators struggled with this word because we have no equivalent in our language. Hope appears to be the ability to believe in positive outcomes even when evidence suggests otherwise. Humans used hope to maintain motivation in hopeless situations. They stopped before a collection of human writings that had been found in the ruins of their cities. Dr. Morridon activated a holographic display showing translated text from human books, poems, and personal journals. The words spoke of dreams for the future, plans for better tomorrows, and faith that good things would eventually happen despite current hardships. During our final assault on their colonies, humans continued working on projects they knew they would never complete, Dr. Morridon explained. Teachers kept preparing lessons for students who might not survive the week. Scientists continued research that would take decades to finish. Artists created works they would never see displayed. They maintained hope even when logic suggested it was pointless. Gixhara remembered the interrogation of Dr. Lisa Bennett, a human scientist captured during the siege of their research station on Mars. She had been working on a cure for a genetic disease that affected Xanthari children, despite knowing that her own species faced extinction. When asked why she continued this work, Bennett had said that helping others was more important than her personal survival. The concept had been so alien to Xanthari, thinking that Gixhara had assumed she was lying or mentally unstable. Xanthari individuals worked for the benefit of their immediate family groups and the Empire as a whole, but never for the welfare of enemy species. Yet Dr. Bennett had seemed sincere in her desire to help Xanthari children, even as Xanthari forces destroyed human settlements across the galaxy. The humans also possessed what they called friendship. Dr. Morridon continued, moving to a display of personal communications intercepted during the war. They formed emotional bonds with individuals who were not related to them genetically, treating these bonds as seriously as family relationships. Friends would sacrifice for each other without expectation of genetic advantage. The holographic display showed thousands of messages between human friends, sharing experiences, offering support during difficult times, and expressing care for each other's welfare. Xanthari relationships were based on practical alliances and genetic loyalty, but humans seemed to choose their emotional attachments based on shared interests, personality compatibility, and mutual affection. Gixhara recalled intercepting communications between human soldiers during battle. They frequently risked their lives to rescue wounded comrades, even when those comrades were not family members, and the rescue attempts compromised military objectives. Human commanders often made tactical decisions based on protecting their subordinates, rather than achieving strategic goals. Perhaps most puzzling was their concept of love, Dr. Morridon said, activating another display showing human poetry, music, and art dedicated to this emotion. Love appeared to be an intense emotional attachment that could form between any individuals, regardless of genetic relationship, practical benefit, or logical compatibility. Humans claimed that love made life worth living and gave meaning to their existence. The laboratory walls filled with examples of human love expressed through various art forms, songs about romantic partners, paintings celebrating parental affection, stories about friendship and loyalty that transcended death itself. The humans had created entire industries devoted to expressing and celebrating love in all its forms. During interrogation, human prisoners frequently spoke about loved ones they wanted to protect, Gixhara admitted. They seemed more concerned about the welfare of these individuals than their own survival. Some prisoners refused to provide military information because they feared it might endanger people they cared about, even when cooperation might have saved their own lives. Dr. Morridon nodded, pulling up records from the final battle at Earth. Captain Tyler Adams told you something during his interrogation that our military analyst dismissed as propaganda. Do you remember his words? Gixhara's expression darkened as he recalled the human prisoner's final statement. He said we could kill them all, but we could not kill what they represented. He claimed that someday we would understand what we had destroyed. I believe Captain Adams was referring to these intangible concepts that made human civilization unique, Dr. Morridon explained. hope, love, friendship, creativity, the willingness to sacrifice for abstract principles. These traits had no military value, but they may have been the source of human strength and innovation. The Admiral looked around the laboratory at the thousands of artifacts representing a dead civilization. Are you suggesting that we destroyed something valuable when we eliminated the humans? I am suggesting that we eliminated something we did not understand, Dr. Moraiden replied. And our civilization has been declining ever since. The timing may not be coincidental. Gixhara considered her words as they walked through the final section of the laboratory. Human artifacts surrounded them on all sides, silent witnesses to a species that had valued beauty, love, hope, and friendship above practical survival. The Zenthari had won the war through superior firepower and logical tactics, but they had never understood what made their enemies fight so desperately for things that could not be measured or quantified. The humans fought for their right to dream, Dr. Moraiden concluded. We fought for territorial control and resource acquisition. We achieved our goals, but we destroyed something in the process that we are only beginning to understand. The question now is whether we can learn from their example, before our own civilization loses the capacity for growth and renewal. Commander Zeftel sat in the military archives beneath the Zenthari War College, surrounded by holographic displays showing the final campaigns against human civilization. The recorded battles played out in silent light, showing the systematic destruction of every human world and station across their small corner of the galaxy. Each victory had felt righteous at the time, but now the images filled him with an uncomfortable emptiness. The siege of Mars had lasted 3 months, longer than expected for such a small human colony. Intelligence reports had suggested the planet held strategic military value, but when Zenthari forces finally breached the defensive barriers, they found something unexpected. The humans had converted their central settlement into a massive library and art gallery, filling every available space with books, paintings, sculptures, and musical recordings. They knew they were going to die, Zeftel said to Lieutenant Hexmala, who had served under his command during the Mars campaign. They spent their final months preserving their culture, instead of building weapons or escape ships. They wanted their art to survive even if they could not. Hexmala activated another holographic display, showing the interior of the Mars colony during its final days. Human civilians, including children and elderly individuals, worked together to carefully pack cultural artifacts into protected storage containers. They labeled everything with detailed descriptions, as if hoping someone would eventually find their treasures and understand their meaning. The human leader on Mars was a woman named Dr. Patricia Webb, Hexmala recalled. When we captured her, she did not ask for mercy or offer to surrender. She only requested that we preserve their cultural archives for future study. She said that destroying art was a crime against the entire universe, not just against humanity. Zeftel remembered Dr. Webb's words clearly. She had spoken with calm dignity even as Zenthari soldiers restrained her, showing no fear for herself but obvious concern for the paintings and books surrounding them. Her final request had been that any species discovering the archives should try to understand what humans had believed about beauty, truth, and the meaning of existence. The next display showed Europa Station, humanity's research outpost orbiting Jupiter. The facility had been lightly defended, serving primarily as a scientific installation rather than a military base. Zenthari forces had expected a quick victory, but the siege lasted weeks longer than planned due to the humans' refusal to surrender. Sam Rodriguez and Kate Murphy were the senior engineers on Europa. Zeftel continued, reading from the archived reports. They kept the station's communications array working until the final moment, broadcasting human music and poetry into deep space. They said they wanted the galaxy to remember that humans had existed and created beautiful things. The holographic recording showed the 2 human engineers working frantically to maintain their transmission equipment as Zenthari ships closed in around the station. Instead of trying to send military intelligence or call for rescue, they spent their final hours broadcasting symphonies, reading poems aloud, and sharing stories about human achievement and creativity. Hexmala pulled up the transmission logs from Europa Station's final broadcast. Kate Murphy read a poem called "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night" by someone named Dylan Thomas. She said it represented the human spirit's refusal to surrender to darkness. The words talked about raging against the dying of the light. They were not raging against us, Zeftel realized. They were raging against the idea that consciousness and beauty could be extinguished from the universe. They fought to preserve meaning itself, not just their physical lives. The most disturbing discovery had come from Titan Station, humanity's research facility on Saturn's largest moon. Xanthari intelligence had expected to find weapons development or military planning, but instead they discovered that human scientists had been working on medical research aimed at helping other species, including the Xanthari themselves. Dr. Alex Carter led the research team on Titan, studying genetic diseases that affected various alien populations throughout the galaxy. His laboratory contained detailed analysis of Xanthari biology. But instead of seeking weaknesses to exploit, the humans had been developing treatments for hereditary conditions that plagued Xanthari children. Dr. Carter could have used his knowledge of our genetics to create biological weapons, Hexmala observed. He understood our physiology better than most Xanthari scientists. But he chose to work on cures instead of weapons, even as our fleets approached his station. The archived interviews with Dr. Carter showed a middle-aged human male who spoke passionately about the potential for medical cooperation between species. He believed that sharing knowledge and resources could eliminate suffering throughout the galaxy, regardless of political conflicts between different civilizations. He said that disease was the real enemy of all conscious beings, Zeftal recalled. He could not understand why species chose to fight each other when they could work together against common threats like aging, genetic disorders, and environmental hazards. Even knowing that we intended to destroy his species, he continued working to help our children. The final display showed the battle for Earth itself, humanity's blue-green homeworld that had been their species' birthplace and cultural center. The planet's defenses had been formidable, but not in the way Xanthari strategists had expected. Instead of focusing on military installations, the humans had concentrated on preserving and transmitting their cultural heritage. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos had commanded the final defense of New York, one of Earth's major population centers. Rather than ordering her soldiers to fight to the death, she had them gather in the city's Central Park to sing their national songs and share stories about their families, their dreams, and their hopes for humanity's future. The humans turned their final battle into a celebration of their culture, Zeftal said, watching the recorded images of human soldiers singing together as Xanthari bombers approached overhead. They faced extinction by affirming what made life worth living. They showed no hatred toward us, only sadness that the universe was losing something beautiful. Hexmala activated the audio recordings from Earth's final day. Human voices could be heard across all communication frequencies, not sending military commands or desperate pleas for help, but sharing music, poetry, personal messages of love, and readings from their philosophical and religious texts. They were teaching us, Zeftal realized, his voice filled with growing understanding. In their final moments, they were trying to show us what we were destroying. They wanted us to understand that they were not just another species competing for resources, but beings capable of creating meaning and beauty that enriched the entire universe. The recordings included messages specifically directed towards Xanthari forces, spoken in carefully pronounced Xanthari language by humans who had studied their culture. These messages did not contain military intelligence or surrender offers, but rather explanations of human values, human achievements, and human dreams for a future where different species could learn from each other, rather than destroy each other. One message came from a human child named Tommy Chen, who could not have been more than 10 years old. He spoke directly to Xanthari children, describing his favorite games, his pet animals, and his hopes to become an artist who would paint pictures of alien worlds. The boy expressed curiosity about Xanthari culture and sadness that they would never have the chance to be friends. They were trying to give us gifts, Hexmala said quietly. Art, music, scientific knowledge, medical research, philosophical insights. They offered these freely even to their enemies, because they believed that consciousness and creativity were sacred things that belonged to the entire universe, not just to humanity. Zeftal closed his eyes, remembering the moment when the last human transmission fell silent. The galaxy had suddenly felt larger and emptier, as if an important voice in a cosmic conversation had been permanently silenced. At the time, he had felt only the satisfaction of military victory, but now he understood that something irreplaceable had been lost. "We won the war," he said finally. "We eliminated the human threat to our empire and established our dominance over their former territories. But we also eliminated something that had been making the galaxy more interesting, more beautiful, and more meaningful. We destroyed teachers who wanted to share their knowledge, artists who created beauty for its own sake, and dreamers who believed in possibilities we had never imagined. The holographic displays faded, leaving the two Zenthari officers alone in the darkened archive chamber. Around them, thousands of recorded battles testified to their military superiority, but the victory felt hollow now that they understood what they had truly defeated. Supreme Overlord Thekamal stood before the assembled High Council, his ancient scales dulled with age and worry. 50 years of absolute victory had brought the Zenthari Empire to the height of its power, controlling vast territories that once belonged to dozens of different species. Yet the empire was dying from within, rotting like fruit left too long in perfect storage conditions. Fellow council members, Thekamal began, his voice carrying the weight of uncomfortable truths. We gather today to discuss the state of our civilization, and I must tell you that our victory over the humans has cost us more than we ever imagined possible. We have won the galaxy, but we are losing ourselves. Cultural Minister Yelkira activated a holographic display showing statistics that painted a disturbing picture of Zenthari society. Birth rates had declined steadily for 5 decades, dropping to levels that threatened the species' long-term survival. Young Zenthari showed little interest in traditional careers, relationships, or the expansion of their empire. Many spent their days in passive entertainment, consuming old media rather than creating new experiences. Our art has become stagnant, Yelkira reported, her voice heavy with disappointment. Zenthari musicians produce the same melodies their predecessors created centuries ago. Our painters copy ancient styles without innovation or personal expression. Our writers tell stories that follow predictable patterns, lacking the creativity and passion that once defined our cultural achievements. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had all noticed the decline in artistic quality, but none had wanted to address the problem publicly. Zenthari culture had always prized efficiency and tradition over wild creativity, but their society had never felt so lifeless and repetitive before. The problem extends beyond art, economic advisor Nexgul added, rising to present his own disturbing findings. Technological innovation has slowed to near zero across all sectors of our empire. We excel at maintaining and improving existing systems, but we have not developed any revolutionary new technologies in decades. Our research facilities produce incremental upgrades rather than breakthrough discoveries. Admiral Kexathera leaned forward, troubled by these revelations. During the war against humanity, Zenthari scientists had developed new weapons, faster ships, and improved communication systems at an unprecedented pace. The pressure of conflict had driven innovation and creativity, forcing their people to think beyond traditional limitations. The humans were terrible enemies, Kexathera admitted reluctantly. But they were also remarkable innovators. Their technology was often inferior to ours, but they found creative ways to use it that surprised our military analysts. They combined different systems in unexpected ways, creating solutions that our logical approach would never have considered. Dr. Moridan stood to address the council, her research data prepared for presentation. I have spent 50 years studying human remains and artifacts, trying to understand what made their civilization unique. My findings suggest that humans possess something our species lacks: the ability to find meaning in struggle, to create purpose from chaos, and to generate hope from despair. The holographic display showed images of human artwork created during their darkest moments, paintings made in underground shelters, music composed during sieges, poems written by soldiers facing certain death. The humans had responded to suffering by creating beauty, transforming their pain into expressions that moved other beings to feel emotions they had never experienced before. The humans called this quality the human spirit, Dr. Moridan continued. It appears to be a form of consciousness that thrives on challenge, growth, and emotional connection. They needed obstacles to overcome, mysteries to solve, and relationships to nurture. Without these elements, they became depressed and listless, much like our own young people today. Supreme Overlord Thekamal nodded grimly. You suggest that we are suffering from the same condition that affected humans in comfortable circumstances? I suggest that we eliminated the source of challenge and inspiration that kept both our species growing, Dr. Moridan replied. The humans were chaotic, unpredictable, and emotionally driven, but they were also creative, innovative, and passionate about life itself. Their presence in the galaxy forced other species to adapt, to think in new ways, to question their assumptions about reality. Minister Yelkira pulled up archived communications from before the war, showing cultural exchanges between Xanthari and human artists. Human musicians had been experimenting with Xanthari harmonic structures, creating hybrid compositions that pleased both species. Human writers had been adapting Xanthari philosophical concepts into stories that explored new possibilities for conscious beings. The humans were contaminating our culture, Admiral Kexathera observed. Their emotional approach to art and science was spreading to our own people, making them less efficient and more unpredictable. Yes, Dr. Moraiden agreed. And that contamination was making us more creative, more innovative, and more alive. We eliminated it because we feared change. But change may have been exactly what our civilization needed to continue growing. Economic advisor Nexghoul presented data showing the correlation between human extinction and Xanthari decline. The timeline is remarkably clear. Within 5 years of eliminating the last human colony, our innovation rates began dropping. Within 10 years, our birth rates started declining. Within 20 years, our artistic output became repetitive and uninspired. The pattern suggests a direct connection. Young Xanthari had begun seeking out human cultural archives, studying their music, art, and literature with desperate intensity. Many spent hours in the preserved human libraries, trying to understand what made these extinct beings so different from their own species. Some had even attempted to create art in human styles, though their efforts lacked the emotional depth that had made human creativity so compelling. Our youth are hungry for something we cannot provide, Yelkira admitted. They sense that something is missing from their lives, but they cannot identify what they need. They study human culture like archaeologists examining the ruins of a lost civilization, knowing that they are missing some essential element that would make existence meaningful. Dr. Moraiden activated another display, showing brain scans of young Xanthari compared to archived scans of human subjects. Human neural patterns showed constant activity in regions associated with imagination, empathy, and emotional processing. Xanthari brains focus on logic, efficiency, and pattern recognition. We are fundamentally different types of consciousness, and those differences were complementary rather than competitive. You mean they completed us in some way? Supreme Overlord Thekmal asked. I mean they challenged us to become more than we could be alone, Dr. Moraiden replied. Their chaos balanced our order. Their emotion balanced our logic. Their creativity balanced our efficiency. Together, both species might have evolved beyond the limitations that constrain us individually. The council chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. They had not simply defeated an enemy species. They had eliminated their partners in a cosmic dance of growth and development. The humans had been the catalyst that pushed Xanthari civilization toward new possibilities, and without them, the Empire had begun a slow decline toward sterile perfection. What do you recommend? Thekmal asked, though he suspected the answer would be painful to hear. We cannot bring back the humans, Dr. Moraiden said quietly, but we can try to understand what they represented and find ways to cultivate those qualities within our own civilization. We must learn to value chaos alongside order, emotion alongside logic, creativity alongside efficiency. We must become more human, even though humanity is gone. Admiral Kexathera looked around the council chamber, seeing the truth reflected in every face. They had won the greatest military victory in Xanthari history, but they had lost something far more valuable in the process. Their triumph had become their tragedy, and their greatest enemy had been their greatest teacher. The Human Memorial Archive occupied the largest building in the Xanthari capital, its crystalline walls reaching toward the twin suns like a monument to lost possibilities. Inside, thousands of young Xanthari wandered through halls filled with preserved human artifacts, studying the remnants of a civilization they would never truly understand. Dr. Moraiden walked among them, watching their faces as they encountered the creativity and passion of an extinct species. Admiral Kexathera had requested this final meeting in the archive itself, surrounded by the evidence of what the Xanthari Empire had destroyed. The archived human communications from before the war painted a picture of missed opportunities that haunted him more with each passing year. Captain Ben Parker of the exploration vessel New Horizons had been transmitting friendship messages in carefully learned Xanthari language, hoping to establish peaceful contact between their species. Captain Parker wanted to share star charts and navigation techniques, Kexthera said. Standing before a display showing the human explorer's final transmission, he believed that cooperation between our species could open new regions of the galaxy for both civilizations to explore together. He offered to exchange cultural ambassadors and establish joint research stations. Dr. Moridan nodded sadly, pulling up another archived communication. Dr. Emma Foster was developing medical technologies that could have extended Xanthari lifespans by several centuries. She had discovered methods for regenerating damaged organs and reversing cellular aging. Her research notes show that she planned to share these discoveries freely with all intelligent species, including potential enemies. The irony was overwhelming. The humans had been offering gifts that the Xanthari desperately needed now. Medical advances, technological innovations, cultural enrichment, and perspectives that could have prevented their current decline. Instead of accepting these offerings, the Empire had chosen to view human generosity as a sign of weakness to be exploited. A young Xanthari named Kelvara approached them, her scales still bright with youth but her eyes filled with the emptiness that plagued her generation. She had been studying human music for months, trying to understand how simple arrangements of sound could evoke such powerful emotional responses in other species. Dr. Moridan, Kelvara said, her voice carrying the lifeless tone common among young Xanthari. I have been listening to human compositions called symphonies, but I cannot understand why they make me feel strange inside. The mathematical patterns are complex but not particularly innovative. Why do they affect me differently than our traditional music? Dr. Moridan smiled gently, recognizing the question she heard dozens of times each day from young visitors to the archive. Human music was not designed primarily for mathematical beauty, Kelvara. It was created to express emotions and experiences that cannot be communicated through words or logical concepts. The strangeness you feel is your mind encountering emotional complexity that our species rarely experiences. Kelvara nodded uncertainly, but her confusion was obvious. She could analyze the technical structure of human symphonies, but she could not access the emotional content that made them meaningful. The barrier between Xanthari and human consciousness remained even after death, preventing true understanding of what had been lost. Admiral Kexthera moved to another section of the archive, where diplomatic messages from human leaders had been preserved for study. Ambassador Richard Stone had spent years learning Xanthari customs and language, preparing detailed proposals for cultural and scientific exchange programs. His communications showed a deep respect for Xanthari achievements and a genuine desire to learn from their advanced civilization. Ambassador Stone believed that Xanthari logic and human creativity could solve problems that neither species could address alone. Kexthera read from the preserved files. He proposed joint missions to explore the galactic core, combined research into consciousness and artificial intelligence, and cultural festivals where both species could share their greatest achievements. The ambassador's final message, sent just days before the war began, contained an offer to evacuate Earth and relocate humanity to uninhabited worlds if territorial disputes could not be resolved peacefully. He had been willing to sacrifice human claims to their homeworld if it meant preventing the destruction of both civilizations through warfare. Dr. Moridan led them to the archive's central chamber, where a massive holographic display showed the last transmission from Earth. The message had been broadcast simultaneously in hundreds of languages, including perfect Xanthari, as human civilization faced its final moments. Instead of threats or curses, the transmission contained humanity's greatest philosophical insights, artistic achievements, and scientific discoveries, offered freely to any species that might find them useful. They were giving us their cultural inheritance, Dr. Moridan explained, watching young Xanthari attempt to understand the complex emotional content of human poetry and art. They wanted their knowledge and creativity to survive even if their bodies could not. They believed that consciousness itself was sacred, regardless of which species possessed it. The final section of the message had been recorded by a group of human children, who sang songs and read stories while their world burned around them. The children spoke directly to alien youngsters they would never meet, sharing their favorite games, their dreams for the future, and their hope that someday different species could be friends instead of enemies. Ambassador Velnara had arrived at the archive for the meeting, though she rarely visited the memorial except for official ceremonies. The evidence of human compassion and creativity made her uncomfortable, challenging her justifications for the war and its aftermath. She stood before a display showing human scientific research, much of which had been aimed at solving universal problems rather than advancing purely human interests. The humans were studying ways to communicate with non-carbon-based life forms, Velnara admitted reluctantly. They wanted to establish contact with energy beings, silicon-based organisms, and other exotic forms of consciousness that we have never even attempted to understand. Their curiosity extended far beyond their own survival or territorial expansion. Dr. Moridan pulled up the final piece of evidence that had convinced her of humanity's true nature. During the siege of the Human Research Station on Europa, Xanthari forces had discovered a massive cultural preservation project that the humans had been working on for decades. They had been collecting art, music, literature, and philosophical works from every intelligent species in the galaxy, including their enemies. The humans were building a universal library, she explained, showing holographic images of carefully catalogued alien artifacts from dozens of different civilizations. They preserved Xanthari poetry that our own people had forgotten, maintained copies of scientific discoveries from species that had gone extinct centuries earlier, and created detailed records of cultural practices from across the galaxy. The project had been entirely voluntary, with human scholars spending their own resources to preserve the heritage of other species, simply because they believed that knowledge and beauty belonged to the universe, rather than to any individual civilization. They had risked their lives traveling to dangerous regions of space to rescue cultural artifacts from dying worlds, asking nothing in return except the opportunity to study and preserve the creative achievements of conscious beings. Admiral Kexithera stared at the evidence surrounding them, finally understanding the magnitude of what the Xanthari Empire had destroyed. They were not just another species competing for resources. They were the custodians of galactic culture, the preservers of universal knowledge, the bridges between different forms of consciousness. Dr. Moridan nodded grimly. And we eliminated them because we feared their chaos would contaminate our ordered society. We destroyed the very beings who could have helped us grow beyond our limitations and become something greater than we ever imagined possible. Young Xanthari continued to wander through the memorial archive, studying the remnants of human civilization with desperate fascination. They sensed that something important was missing from their lives, but they could only observe the evidence of human passion and creativity from the outside. The emotional depth that had made humanity unique could not be learned or copied. It could only be experienced through genuine connection and shared growth. The memorial's final display contained Ambassador Stone's last words to the Xanthari Empire, recorded as human ships burned in the void around Earth. He had spoken without anger or hatred, expressing only sadness that two species capable of learning from each other had chosen destruction instead of cooperation. "We forgive you," the ambassador had said, his image flickering in the holographic display. "We understand that you fear change and difference, but we hope that someday you will realize that diversity makes the universe more beautiful, not more dangerous. We offer our knowledge, our art, and our love freely to any beings willing to receive them. Perhaps our death will teach you something that our life could not." Dr. Moridan's final report lay open on her data tablet, containing conclusions that would reshape Xanthari understanding of their place in the galaxy.